For nearly 10 days, the heart of Las Vegas, the casinos, the hotels, the endless moving pieces, simply froze. Not because of fire, not because of a strike, but because someone outsmarted the help desk. Help was the weak link. Guests could not rely on digital room keys. Reservations failed. Casino systems became unreliable. ATMs and card terminals were disrupted. Even slot machines stopped paying out. Imagine checking in, paying for dinner, opening your room, pulling cash, booking a show, and none of it working. Confidence collapsed fast. On September 11, 2023, MGM Resorts publicly revealed the outage. MGM later estimated the September cybersecurity issue would negatively impact third-quarter results by $100 million in adjusted property EBITDA for the Las Vegas Strip, plus regional properties. Reporting widely attributes the entry to social engineering tactics, reportedly targeting identity and access workflows at support and credential reset functions. Coverage named a group called Scattered Spider, and reporting tied ALPHV Black Cat to the extortion and ransomware side. This is not a technical how-to, it is a human systems failure, where procedures, verification, and outsourced support ecosystems become the weakest link. If the most engineered entertainment city can be paused by a phone call and a reset, how vulnerable is every other smart industry? That question is the real hook. Lines snaked through casino lobbies as guests clutched luggage and stared at blank screens. The digital check-in kiosks, usually humming with activity, stood silent. Front desk staff scrambled for pens and paper. Handwriting reservations the system could no longer process. At the Bellagio, families waited for hours for a room key that worked. The mobile app, once a promise of convenience, flashed error messages and left some travelers locked out of their own rooms. Slot machines, the heartbeat of the casino floor, blinked and powered down without warning. Players watched jackpots freeze mid-spin. With accounting servers offline, payouts stalled and machines went dark. The familiar chorus of electronic sounds faded, replaced by confusion and frustration. At restaurants and bars, card terminals rejected every swipe. Staff taped handwritten signs to registers that read cash only. ATM machines, usually a lifeline for gamblers and tourists, displayed system error codes. Guests wandered from machine to machine, searching for one that would dispense cash. Others lined up at front desks as staff tried to verify identities without access to digital records. Every part of the guest experience broke down at once. Show tickets could not be booked. Loyalty rewards vanished from accounts. Even routine requests like extra towels or a wake-up call fell through when internal phones and apps failed. The promise of a seamless Vegas escape collapsed into a maze of manual workarounds and mounting frustration. In a city built to never sleep, the lights were on, but the machine behind the magic had stopped cold, and that is when the next problem hit. For nearly 10 days, the pulse of MGM's empire slowed to a crawl. The outage did not just last an afternoon or a single weekend, it stretched on day after day. Each morning brought the same lines, the same confusion, the same broken promises of digital convenience. Guests checking in on September 12, 2023, had no idea they would spend their entire stay without working keys, reliable payments, or access to amenities they had booked. By September 15th, frustration had turned to disbelief. The neon outside still blazed, but inside, the systems that powered everything from slot machines to room service remained crippled. Across the Strip, rumors spread. Was it a software glitch? Was it a power failure? The truth was harder to accept. One of the most sophisticated hospitality operations in the world was powerless to restore normalcy for more than a week. Some properties managed to limp along with partial fixes, but full recovery did not arrive until September 18th or September 19th, 2023. Every hour without a fix chipped away at the illusion of control. Nearly 10 days in the dark in a city that sells certainty and spectacle. That is not a hiccup, that is a blackout. It left thousands wondering how a place built on precision and promise could be brought to a standstill so completely. And that is when the next problem hit. A single phone call set everything in motion. The attackers had done their homework, scouring LinkedIn for the right name, the right role, someone whose access could open doors. Armed with just enough personal detail, they dialed the MGM help desk, speaking with the calm confidence of someone who belonged. The voice on the other end was just another employee, or so it seemed. The help desk agent, following routine, listened as the caller explained a familiar problem, lost credentials, urgent need for a reset, a job that could not wait. The agent asked questions, but the answers matched what was in the system: names, titles, even internal lingo picked up from public profiles. There was no reason to doubt, no red flag obvious enough to halt the process. In less than 10 minutes, the caller walked away with fresh credentials and a foothold deep inside the digital backbone of MGM. It was not a high-tech hack or a brute force attack, it was trust misplaced. The breach did not begin with code, it started with human nature, a voice that sounded just like everyone else asking for a little help. With a single reset, the attackers gained more than just a password. They stepped into the heart of MGM's digital identity systems. Okta and Azure, the platforms controlling who could access what, now had new administrators. These were not regular user accounts. They were the keys to the kingdom, granting broad control over back-end operations, from reservation databases to slot machine networks. The breach was not about guessing passwords or breaking firewalls. It was about convincing one person at the right moment to hand over access, bypassing layers of technical defenses in minutes. Security experts later attributed the social engineering to a group known as Scattered Spider, and ALPHV, also called Black Cat, was reportedly responsible for the ransomware and extortion that followed. With that level of access, attackers could move laterally, escalate privileges, and disable or encrypt critical systems at will. The escalation that followed was not a side effect. It was the logical outcome when the very tools meant to keep the business running fell under someone else's control. That is why MGM, facing an invisible adversary with admin rights, had no choice but to start shutting systems down. Those shutdowns would ripple through check-ins, payments, and gaming floors, and that is when the next problem hit. The numbers told a story no slot machine ever could. MGM's financial filings laid it out in black and white. The September cyberattack cost the company roughly $100 million in adjusted property EBITDA. This was not a hypothetical risk or a line item that could be buried. It was a direct hit, tens of millions lost in less than 2 weeks, with every hour of downtime draining revenue from the Strip and regional resorts alike. Revenue vanished as rooms sat empty, casino floors went quiet, and guests walked away frustrated or never checked in at all. The usual hum of digital transactions, every tap, swipe, and scan, had gone silent, and with it, the steady flow of cash that kept the lights burning bright. Labor costs soared as staff worked overtime just to keep basic operations afloat. Recovery expenses piled up, from emergency IT support to manual guest services, and every workaround came at a premium. For investors, the impact was immediate and undeniable. MGM's quarterly earnings report did not sugarcoat the reality. The $100 million figure stood out, a single event wiping out nearly a week and a half of profit across one of the world's largest gaming empires. Analysts who once measured risk in market swings or hotel occupancy now had to factor in the cost of a phone call gone wrong. The disruption was not just operational, it was financial, and the shockwaves reached far beyond the casino floor. Company leadership faced tough questions. How could a system designed for resilience be so fragile? What would it take to rebuild lost confidence among guests, shareholders, and regulators watching from the sidelines? The balance sheet damage was clear, but the true cost, trust shaken, reputation dented, and future risk recalculated, could not be measured in dollars alone. $100 million lost in less than 10 days. For an industry that sells certainty, that is a number that lingers. And for everyone watching, it raised a new kind of bet. If the digital backbone fails, how much more can Vegas afford to lose? Regulators did not wait for the dust to settle. The Nevada Gaming Control Board moved in quickly and coordinated closely with MGM as systems stayed offline. The mandate was simple: protect the integrity of gaming operations and restore public trust. Investigators reviewed logs, searched for internal policy failures, and pressed for answers on how safeguards were bypassed. The question was always the same: how did this happen when systems were supposed to stop it from happening? Federal scrutiny followed. MGM filings referenced inquiries from agencies responsible for consumer protection and cybersecurity oversight. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, entered the picture to examine whether MGM's digital practices met federal standards for safeguarding personal information. Those reviews reached beyond code. Regulators probed process, training, and the effectiveness of third-party support contracts. For months, MGM faced a steady stream of document requests and subpoenas. Quarterly filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, acknowledged the ongoing oversight and listed state and federal inquiries as active matters. Compliance teams scrambled to show what MGM did before the breach, how it responded in real time, and which changes were already underway. By early 2025, the Federal Trade Commission dispute officially ended. No public penalties or settlements were announced. Still, the process left a clear lesson. Public investigations can last years, and closure does not erase the scrutiny. For MGM, every digital workflow, every help desk script, and every vendor contract landed under a microscope. Regulators made it plain that casinos are not only about gaming meters and chips. They are stewards of sensitive data and critical infrastructure, and agencies now have the power to review licenses or demand sweeping reforms. That regulatory heat did not stay confined to one company. It set the tone for the entire industry. Operators were warned that the next breach would bring tougher questions and that regulators would expect documented changes to identity verification, contingency planning, and vendor oversight. For customers, the consequences are immediate. When the systems stop, you cannot check in with a digital key, you cannot pay for dinner easily, you cannot open your room, you cannot pull cash, and you cannot book a show with a tap. Regulators came to ask why those everyday moments now depend on fragile processes and what it will take to make them dependable again. The legal reckoning for MGM's digital disasters arrived as a massive consumer settlement. After years of lawsuits tied to both the 2019 data breach and the 2023 cyber attack, the company agreed to pay out $45 million to affected guests. This was not a lump sum check to every visitor, but a structured resolution overseen by a court-appointed settlement administrator. Claimants could file for tiered payments, starting with a basic amount for anyone whose information was exposed, and rising to higher tiers for people who could prove actual losses or expenses tied to the breaches. That could include reimbursement for time spent dealing with fraud alerts or identity monitoring, or out-of-pocket costs like credit freezes or replacement identification. The process required documentation, and the tiers were meant to balance speed with fairness. Every claim was reviewed by the administrator, whose job was to make sure the funds reached people who qualified under the settlement terms. The $45 million cap defined the pool, and once distributed, the case would close, ending MGM's direct legal exposure for these incidents. For thousands of guests, the settlement offered more than money. It was recognition that the digital systems they had trusted with personal details had failed them not once but twice. The payout did not erase locked doors or the anxiety of exposed data, but it put a dollar figure on what it means when a casino's promise of frictionless escape breaks down. As the claims process unfolded, attention turned to what would actually change inside the casinos. Legal closure was one thing. Restoring trust would demand operational shifts, tougher identity verification, and new contingency planning. That work would determine whether compensation becomes the end of the story or the beginning of real reform. Inside MGM's operations, centers the aftermath forced a reckoning. The digital shortcuts that once promised speed and ease became liabilities overnight. Returning guests now face stricter identity checks at every turn. Guests are asked for government-issued photo identification, extra verification steps, and sometimes a second employee must be on hand just to approve a simple credential reset. The help desk, once a quiet back office, is now a frontline defense. Every request is scrutinized, every reset logged, and every caller is challenged to prove who they are beyond what shows up in the system. Manual backups are no longer an afterthought. Paper check-in logs and printed reservation lists sit ready behind counters just in case another outage hits. And that is when the next problem could start. Security teams now monitor for unusual activity around the clock, with new alerts and escalation protocols designed to catch social engineering attempts before they spiral. The company's filings mention business interruption insurance, an invisible safety net that helped cushion the financial blow. But even insurance has limits. After the incident, premiums rose and policies became harder to negotiate, not just for MGM, but for every major player on the Strip. Insurers now ask pointed questions about process, training, and how companies plan to keep operations running when the network goes dark. Hospitality executives across Las Vegas took notice. Boardrooms filled with urgent conversations about contingency planning and the real cost of digital convenience. The attack proved casinos are not just entertainment venues. They are sprawling, interconnected computer networks, with every guest transaction relying on fragile threads of code and process. And when those threads snap, the fallout is personal. It is financial. It is a public spectacle. The ripple effects stretch far beyond Vegas. Hotels, airports, and retail chains that sell digital convenience now face the same uncomfortable question. If a casino empire can be paused by a phone call and a credential reset, what is stopping the same thing from happening anywhere else? If you've ever had a trip derailed by a tech outage, or you work in hospitality or security, drop your take below. And subscribe, because the next story shows how another iconic Vegas property is quietly changing in ways most people won't notice until it is too late. Today, every casino floor is a digital network, one vulnerable voice call away from chaos. As Vegas and industries worldwide tighten identity controls, the lesson endures. No firewall can patch a weak process. Last year, $100 million vanished in days. Next time, the stakes could be bigger. The real gamble now is not at the tables. The real gamble is trusting the system behind the lights. What would you risk if the network went dark?